Sure. Thank you everyone for joining us for our WordPress webinar. This is a special webinar this month because it is our first ever customer spooktacular appreciation month. Since we are Ghost Inspector, we've been waiting a long time to fully promote being a ghostly logo. So we're super excited to embrace spooky season and tie it in with Customer Appreciation Month. So we've been doing customer spotlights on our social media channels, shouting out to some of our customers. And for today's webinar, if anyone wants to stick around, we'll be having some prize giveaways. We have some swag totes, some sticker packs, and we also have 2 gift card giveaways. We have one for Goldbelly, if anyone's unfamiliar. Goldbelly is an online shop where you can order from really awesome restaurants and bakeries located across the US. So this one would be for US attendees only. Unfortunately, they don't do international shipping, but you can get like cookies or I think the famous banana bread pudding from Magnolia's, or Austin's Franklin barbecue, I believe is on there too. You could order barbecue. So we'll be giving a gift card for Goldbelly. And then our second gift card giveaway today is for anyone. It's for international, and any customer can, any attendee today can win. It is from our friends at WP. I want to make sure this is right here. WP101.com. So this is a lifetime access to their members only help forum, unlimited access to their WordPress tutorials, every course that they provide. So hopefully you can brush up on any of your WordPress, ask any questions, and facilitate any of your future learning with WordPress with our friends at WP101. So that's a lot to look forward to. So we hope you stick around for that. But I'm sure a lot of you are here for Justin's presentation. So I'll kick it over to Justin to start the webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Rhonda. Hey, everybody. Yeah, we're really excited to have you here today. Yeah, we're pretty pumped about celebrating Halloween, celebrating our customers. I should mention some of our team members are in the webinar, in the chat. So we've got both Aaron and Brandon are here, and they're here to answer your questions. So if you have anything that comes up as we're moving along, just pop in our QA or our chat, and they'll try and answer your questions for you. We've got a bunch of things to give out, as Rhonda mentioned, including some stickers, and we're going to shoot it over to anybody who asks a question QA. So anything that comes to mind, shoot it in there. Okay, so I'm gonna start sharing my screen, and we'll kick this off. So the topic of today's webinar is WordPress Witchcraft. Now, actually, one sec. There we go. The topic of today's webinar is WordPress Witchcraft, how to test your CMS. So WordPress is a really awesome CMS platform. I think it drives something like 25% of websites on the internet. It's open source. You can grab it from wordpress.org and download it and run it yourself. There's hosted versions on wordpress.com. So really popular CMS platform that lots of folks and lots of our customers are using. And we love WordPress because it's easy, it's super straightforward, and Ghost Inspector works really nicely with it. So today what I wanted to do was walk through some scenarios for testing both the front end of your website, your WordPress website, and the back end as well. And even touch on our WordPress extension that we have. So I'm going to give a really quick agenda here before I kick it off, and then we'll move on to the more interactive portion. So what we're going to do first is create some front-end tests. So these are going to be testing the user visible side of your site that your customers and visitors are interacting with. Then we're going to move on and actually create some tests that log into our admin panel. And we'll talk a little bit about doing logins and how you might set up that account and the types of things you can do. We'll create a login test. We'll create a test that sets up a post. We'll create a test that does plugin activation, and talk about some of the other situations that you might want to test. And then lastly, we'll circle back around and we'll talk about our WordPress plugin, and I'll give you a really quick tour of what that looks like. So just kind of a note here, the assumption is that you've got a little bit of experience with WordPress, you've got a little bit of experience with Ghost Inspector. So I'm not going to go through like really the basics of Ghost Inspector. We have a number of webinars that do that. You can always pop back and take a look. What I've done here in my Ghost Inspector account is I've set up this WordPress webinar suite, and that's the one we're going to build in today. I've also got this WordPress site set up. So this is just kind of like a stock site. This theme, I think, is a little bit of a riff on the MoMA, like Museum of Art. This is one of the themes that came with WordPress, and I just stood up a really simple WordPress site that we can use for testing. So today we're going to assume that this is a WordPress site and build some tests around it. Now, we don't have any tests yet. So what I'm going to do initially is create a couple of tests just to test our front end. And what's really nice, even with WordPress, is there's nothing special that we need to do to test this site. We don't need to like tell Ghost Inspector that's a WordPress site. It's just going to work out of the box. So this is going to be pretty straightforward. What I always recommend, like kind of step one, you're building your first Ghost Inspector test, is just to put something really simple in place to make sure your homepage is working and looking the way you're expecting it to look. So we're going to use the extension to do this. I'm going to pop it open. I'm going to create a new test. And all I'm going to do, you can see I'm recording here and I could perform some actions, but all I'm going to do this time actually is capture some assertions. So I'll switch over to this assertion mode and I'll perform a couple of checks on the site. So maybe I'm going to check the text of this header up top. And maybe I'll come down here and check for this text at the bottom. So just like some really simple checks to make sure the content that I'm expecting to be there is there. The last thing I'm going to do, and this is kind of a newish feature, we've got this check accessibility option, and I might as well add this. This is going to check various things on the site to make sure they're up to the standards for like the best usability for folks with disabilities. So it checks different attributes and standards. So all I have to do is click this check accessibility button, and it's going to record that step. I'll come back up here and I'll just finish and stop my test there. So we'll call this one homepage. We'll put it in our WordPress webinar suite. We're going to do an initial test run and we'll save it. We get a link to the test. So if you've used Ghost Inspector, you know that we recorded those actions, the assertions, we package it up into a test, we send it off to Ghost Inspector, and now Ghost Inspector is launching a browser and walking through those same checks. Now this is a really simple test, but it's kind of like just a nice insurance policy to make sure my homepage loads, the things that I expect to be there are there. So we've got our first result here. We open the website, we look for that title, we look down in the footer, and here's our accessibility check. And what's great is everything's passing. You can see there are 0 issues found, which truthfully is pretty rare. But I suspect that because this is a built-in WordPress theme, they've done a really good job of making sure that it's like totally accessible. So that's awesome. Over here on the right side, I get, my screenshot so I can confirm that everything looks the way it's supposed to look. And my screenshot comparison is going to check that every time I run the test. So I've got a basic test in place. As you probably know, you can run this test with different browsers, different screen sizes. So if my website is responsive, I could come in here and say, run it with an iPhone X screen size. And we're going to launch it at that resolution and run through the test. I'm kind of running that version on the fly, but if you pop into settings, you can make these adjustments permanently. And you can choose multiple options. So you can say, run this test in Chrome, run this test in Firefox. You can come in display sizes. You can say, run it on an iPhone X, run it on iPad. So you can make a number of selections. And when that test runs, it's going to run with all of them. We can see here, I've got the copy now that's run with the iPhone X screen size. And I've got my screenshot here of the responsive view. So cool. I've got one test, right? So let's record a test now that checks a little bit more functionality. So maybe a good thing to test on the site might be that the search is working. So we'll come back up here. We'll record another test. This time we're going to click on search. We'll do search for our contact form. We can see we've got the one result. So that would be a good thing to assert to make sure, like, yes, we've got that one result that's found. I'm going to assert that. If I want, I could come back in here and record another action, actually click on that contact link. Now I'm on our contact page. I could perform another assertion here, and so on and so forth, kind of carrying through this functional path. We'll stop there, finish this one. We'll call this one search. Do the same thing. We'll save it here. We'll view the test. So you get the idea. In terms of WordPress, there's not anything specific yet that you need to worry about. So if you're primarily testing the front end of your WordPress site, you generally don't have to think about the fact that you're using WordPress. You're just going to build your tests the same way you build them on any other website. In a minute here, we'll jump into recording tests, accessing our backend, and that's where some of the more WordPress specific things start to come into play, and our tests take on a little more complexity. Here we've got a result for our search test. You can see in the video, we're carrying out those same steps we did in our recording, and it's going to walk through and make sure our search is working. So a good place to start on the front end, like homepage, basic functionality, search, contact forms, things like that. Now, what I want to talk about is actually getting into your WordPress admin. And there are a couple of reasons for doing this. We have quite a few customers using WordPress, and in a lot of cases, they want to check that things they've configured in their backend are working. Sometimes that has to do with certain things being triggered when a post is published. It might have to do with a specific plugin that they've created and are using and want to make sure that that's working. So let's go ahead and create a couple of tests that are actually going to log in. So I'll close this one. We'll pop back to our site. Now, WordPress has this admin panel. If you go to wp-admin and you get a login screen. So let me log in first with my account and show you how I've set this up. So you're likely going to have an admin account or a user account that you use to manage the site. When I start creating Ghost Inspector tests to log into WordPress for me, there's definitely a couple of things I want to keep in mind. I always want to use an account that's dedicated to Ghost Inspector. I don't want to put in my own personal credentials in the test. I want to have it segmented off. Ideally, I want to be doing this on a staging site if possible. That gives me some nice separation where I'm not logging production with an account and potentially changing live things. If you're in a situation where that's something that makes sense, you can certainly do that, but you just really want to think this through and make sure your Ghost Inspector tests have just enough access to do the things that they need to do if you're logging into your admin panel. So what I've done is set up this Ghost Inspector user, and that's the one that we're actually going to use in our tests. So I'll go ahead and log out. Let's just start back here at this login URL. And the first thing we're going to do is record a test for just the login sequence. So I'll start another recording. Come in here and we'll do our Ghost Inspector user, our password, log in, and I'm on the dashboard. And I could run with this and start doing other things, but my intent is just to use these steps across the board, to reuse them. So I'm going to stop here. I'm actually going to record an assertion just as a means of verifying that I've made it to the dashboard. So all I'm going to do is come here and click on dashboard, and that's going to record an assertion. It's always a good idea. I feel like a broken record because I say this every webinar, but it's always a good idea to add these assertions and really confirm that the steps you're carrying out at certain points, like checkpoints, are working. So assertions, always a great idea, especially finishing your test. So I'll stop here. We'll just call this, let's call it admin panel. We'll call it login. We'll go ahead and run an initial test run, and we'll take a look. So we'll let this test run, and it's going to log in, get to that dashboard screen, take a screenshot. and that's fine. But my intent isn't necessarily to like run this test directly. What we're going to do now is create a couple more tests, and we're going to inject these steps into the beginning of those tests. We'll just let this run once just to make sure these steps like work as we expect them to work. And then we'll circle back and create some more functional tests. So you can see here, we're all good. You can see where we log in with the Ghost Inspector user, we submit, we perform this assertion, and we're landing on the dashboard. Now I can start recording some of my functional tests. And what's nice is now that I have those login steps captured, I don't have to capture them every time for every recording. I'm going to reuse those. So now I can start right from my dashboard. Let's record a test that creates a post. So we'll start recording. We'll come down here to posts. We'll add a new one. For the title, let's say automated post, and we'll actually throw a timestamp variable in here. This is going to inject a numerical timestamp when this test runs. And at least for the demo purposes, just kind of a nice way of seeing kind of like when that happened and give the result a little bit of a uniqueness so that we can identify it. If I'm doing this in a testing kind of way on production, I might want to change the visibility. So maybe I'm like posting these dummy posts and I actually want them to be hidden. So you have some options here to play with, but we're just going to go ahead and publish because this is just a dummy site. I'll click publish. I'll click publish again. I get this message down here, which is perfect for an assertion. So I'm going to come back up to the extension. I'll make an assertion. Oh no, it disappeared on me. Well, okay, it would have made a nice assertion. We'll finish the test there. We'll say admin panel, new post. This one, we're not going to do an initial test run. So I'm going to turn this off for a second and save the test. And the reason we don't want to run this off the bat is because we need to go in and add those login steps. So you can see I don't have any results yet. I'm going to pop into the editor. And what I can do at the beginning is inject those login steps. So I'll say, add a step above here. I'm going to choose this import steps from test option. And then let's search for login. So we're going to use that admin panel login test here. So I'll save it and run the test. So what it's going to do now is going to pull in those steps, those login steps at the beginning, inject those so that my test will log in and then it'll carry out these actions to create a new post. And we'll be able to kind of see in the steps in a second where those login steps are segmented out. We can kind of condense them down and keep them out of the way so they don't clutter up our tests. But it's really, really handy to be able to jump back in one place and adjust those login steps whenever we need to. So if I decide to change the account credentials or the login process, I can make that adjustment really easily in one place. I recommend using these kind of modules like for any kind of repeatable action that you're going to be carrying out. And you can use variables to customize it each time, things like that. But it's going to save you a lot on the management side of things. So here's our result. I've actually already got it condensed down. I'll come up to view options and show them for a second. You can see the imported steps for the actual login sequence have this little note that shows that it came from our login test. I can come up into the view options and collapse that down, kind of get them out of the way. And once the login happens, then it continues with our steps where we come in, we go to the post title, we enter an automated post name, we publish here. Ideally, we want to be doing some kind of assertion at the end. So if I was a little faster, I could have that one on sort of the message, but if not, I may want to actually navigate to the post. That may be something I want to do anyway to make sure that the post is there looking the way it's supposed to look. As you can see, I've got a screenshot here of the post and I can watch the video. So the usefulness of publishing a new post is really going to kind of depend on what you want to test, and it may lean more towards a staging type setup, but you can do these type of interactive things in your backend. So let's see how our suite's looking. We've got homepage, we've got a search, we've got an admin panel, new post. Let's record one more test. in the admin panel here, and we'll activate a plugin. So this is another one I see, especially with custom plugins, folks sometimes activating it and make sure that those features are taking effect on the actual website. So we'll start from our dashboard again, because we're going to use those login steps. We'll start recording a test. In this case, we're going to come down to plugins, and we want to activate one of these. So we'll do this Hello Dolly one. This is, if you've used WordPress, this is kind of a plugin that comes built in, and it's more of like a plugin for kind of testing or exploring how plugins work. I'm going to go ahead and activate it. I think all it does is put this little text up here. So it's kind of silly, and I could assert that if I want, but what I'll actually assert is this message over here that the plugin's been activated, right? I want to make sure that happened. I know in my years of using WordPress, sometimes I would activate a plugin and actually like crash the site. Like I'd suddenly get like a 500 error. So we want to check that this text is there. And now, just to kind of keep things neat in terms of state, I'm going to go ahead and also deactivate this plugin, just so that I get back to the state I started from, where the plugin is deactivated. And we'll go ahead and assert that message as well. Finish, we'll call this one admin plugin. We're going to turn off our initial test run again, keep that off so that we can add the login steps. Jump here to the test. We'll come into the editor. Just like last time, we're going to add the step to the beginning. We're going to import steps from test. And we're going to choose our admin panel login test here. So we'll save this and give it a run. As this runs, I'll talk a little bit about that kind of state issue that I mentioned. Something you can run into when you're actively changing the configuration of your site in a Ghost Inspector test is that you can run into these sort of non-repeatable situations. So if I created this test and it logs in and activates a plugin, and that's all it does, it assumes that plugin is deactivated. So the next time I run it and the plugin is already active, my test is going to fail because it's not going to find that option to activate the test. And that's why what I'm doing here is activating it and then deactivating it. So the idea is that I get myself back to that starting situation where after the plugin is activated, it's deactivated again, and I'm kind of in the same place. There are steps that you can consider and probably should consider to make this even more sustainable, because things can happen where perhaps I activate the plugin and then here for whatever reason, my test fails for some reason or another, and it doesn't make it to the steps that deactivate it. And now I'm kind of in that funky state where my tests expect the plugin to be deactivated, but it's still activated. So a couple of options there. The simplest one that I can do is I can have this sort of optional step in the beginning to deactivate the plugin if it's active. And the way I'm going to do that is by copying this deactivate step. I'm going to paste it above here before I activate. I'm going to make it optional. So the idea, we'll give this a run. The idea is that my test is now going to come in and it's going to check, and it's basically going to look like, is this plugin active? If so, I'm going to deactivate it and then I'll continue on. And if not, it's going to fail the step, but that step is optional. So it's kind of okay for that step to fail. It's kind of just a safety check. The test will continue on with activating it, deactivating it. So the idea is it's just kind of like a reset step to make sure that I'm always at that point where I expect to be. Another thing I'll show you real quick, if you want to get a little fancier, is of course you could come in with like conditionals. So you could be even smarter about this, and you could check and see whether the plugin is active or not, and then carry out certain steps or skip certain steps. So you can get more elaborate and kind of like more specific here if you'd like. But the optional way is like kind of a handy way to do it that comes in and is like, should I deactivate it? No, it's okay. I couldn't find it. Move on. So nice way to just deal with those situations when you're kind of tinkering with state. And that goes for WordPress or any type of site you might be testing. I'm going to stop there with recording tests, but we've got a pretty nice suite built out. So we've got these 2 tests for our user-facing side of our site. We've got these 2 tests testing some backend functionality. I've got my login steps set up so that I can reuse those and just start recording from the dashboard. And I can kind of expand from here. If there's more things in the admin panel that I want to test, I can do that. There are probably more things on the front end that I want to test, and I can create those tests as well. And of course, I can run this entire suite at once. We run tests in parallel, so you can rip through the suite really quickly, and you can know that your WordPress site is functioning properly. The last thing I want to cover is just our WordPress plugin. Just to be clear, this plugin is not required at all. It's not required for any of the things I did. You can test your WordPress site with Ghost Inspector just fine with the extension and your site without the plugin. This plugin is mainly like a display plugin to give you test statuses on your dashboard. And I've got it here, but if you want to add it, you come up to plugins and you go add new and just search up here for Ghost Inspector. We've got the plugin in the official database here. You can activate it. Once you activate it, you'll see it here. You can activate and you get this settings option. So this takes your API key that's available in your account settings. That's so that the plugin can access your Ghost Inspector data. And then you get a suite ID. So in this case, we've got this WordPress suite we've built out. So I would take that ID and pop it in here to the suite ID. And that's the test results it's going to pull in and show me. And it shows me those on the dashboard. So this is the plugin right here, this block. So what it does is it pulls in the tests, and these are the tests we just created. So it's pulling them in live. It's showing when they were last run, which is of course today. They've all got check marks because they're all passing. I can come in here and link, open these tests directly. And it's just kind of a nice way to get visibility into your Ghost Inspector test right in your WordPress dashboard. So if you're in here a lot, any tests that are failing are going to stand out, and you can open them up and see what's going on there and hopefully address the issue. That's the last WordPress specific bit I wanted to cover. If there are any questions, feel free to pop them into the QA. I'm gonna pop over and see if I can take a look there. And if Renata or Brendan or Aaron, if you've seen anything come up that's worth mentioning live, feel free to unmute yourself and mention it. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a sec here.
I think we're in a pretty good spot. There's been quite a few questions in the chat here. We've been, I think we've taken care of most of them. I think we're in a good place here, Justin.
Nice, cool. Anything that came up that's worth reiterating? I'm sure everybody can pop in the chat and read them. Any kind of obvious ones or interesting ones, Aaron, that you want to call out?
Let's see here. We have a couple of, I think, people that might be fairly new to Ghost Inspector. So we've had some questions about different functionalities, scheduling, dynamic environments and things like that. So, and then a few more advanced questions too. Somebody asked about how would you recommend if you were an agency that were handling multiple sites and wanted to have like a boilerplate of tests or a suite? Would we recommend like just duplicating those? Maybe would be the best way to start off with a new site or something instead of re-recording them all, maybe? Or
yeah, that's a great question. And in fact, we do see that a lot with customers. Oftentimes it's not just that they have a WordPress site, it's that they're an agency and they're building lots of sites with WordPress. If the sites are similar enough, in some cases, similar to the way I created that login test that's kind of reusable, you may be able to create like a core set of tests. And for things that are going to change, for instance, like maybe the title of the site changes, if it's only really specific things, like the sites are nearly identical and the selectors are going to be the same, what you could do is actually create like reusable tests like I did with the login and just use variables for the things that are going to change. So you could have like a suite for each of those sites, and actually have like the set of tests is actually pulling from that template and just kind of plugging in the variables. Couple of different options there. Some of it really kind of depends on, like how similar are the sites, and is it worth trying to have this reusable approach, or is it worth just kind of like duplicating the suites? The nice thing there that I think folks appreciate is that none of our plans are tied to like the number of sites you're testing or the domains or anything like that. You can have one account test as many sites as you like. So just usually splitting them out into suites for different sites is a good way to go.
Yeah, that sounds good. This one looks to be, I'm just going to scan the questions here one more time. If we need some users, Phil's asking, if we need some users with specific user meta or specific situations set up in the backend, is there an easy way to do that backend setup pre-run slightly different to a reset? So this seems sort of like a before test, like a setup condition or something like that.
Sure. Yeah, I can touch on that a little bit. That's definitely a situation that we sometimes see where it's almost like you want to kind of stage your site with certain data, like pre-populate it. There's a couple ways to do that. If that needs to be done through the UI, you could kind of in theory have some Ghost Inspector tests that like do that setup, almost like setup tests and then teardown tests. It can get a little complicated. I think ultimately you usually end up in the situation where you have a couple of suites that need to run in order. Another option is that if you have scripts that do that, and truthfully, a lot of times it's easier to just have like a database script or something simple on your end that runs it. You can kind of take a look at our API. We've also got this CLI tool that makes it easy to trigger Ghost Inspector stuff. So you could lean towards kind of having it on your end. So having a setup script, then you trigger your Ghost Inspector test, then you have a teardown script, so that it kind of like runs on your end. It depends a little bit about the situation you're in. But yeah, if you'd like some more specific, feel free to ping us on support and maybe we can get a better handle on what you're dealing with and make some more specific suggestions.
One of the things I think that teams might end up doing, depending on what tooling you have access to as well, right, is if it gets a little bit more complex doing that kind of setup. I think maybe we can have a blog post on this where spinning up WordPress right inside the build environment in Docker or something and doing the setup there and then running Ghost Inspector tests against that. That's another option as well. Yeah.
I saw one real quick from Jim. He was asking about, can you have a test that tests like this or that? And so I touched on this really quick. I didn't really dive into it, but we have this functionality called Conditionals. And what that lets you do is add a little bit of JavaScript code to a step or a set of tests that determines whether Ghost Inspector should execute that step or that set of steps or skip it. So what you can do is basically like, let's say you wanted to check if like an element had the text A or the text B. You'd have both of those steps that are checking A and checking B, and you'd have conditionals for each. So like you might have some JavaScript that says like, okay, this is site A, so I'm going to check for text A, and another conditional that says like, I'm on site B, let me check for text B. And so you can kind of get as complex as you need to with the JavaScript. You will need a little bit of a handle on writing some JavaScript, but generally it's pretty simple stuff. And that way you can do ORs. You can do like check this or that or this and that. And it adds a lot of functionality to like how your test is being evaluated and what's being checked or what's being skipped.
There's another question here. So if we have time for another one, Justin.
Yeah, let's do one more.
Okay, Tristan asked, this is a good question. Due to automatic updates, often some plugins can be deactivated. Is there a way you might handle that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think what you could do, and this is something, a place where scheduling would probably be pretty handy. So you could have a test, and that test logs in your admin panel, opens up the plugins page, and let's say you have like plugin X, and that might get disabled. That's the one you want to check. Or in theory, you could check all of them, but let's just imagine you're checking one. You could look for that text, like you'd probably look for the text like deactivate, because that would show up when the plugin is activated. And if it's there and your plugin's active, great, like your test passes. If it doesn't find that text, then you could assume like that the plugin is deactivated, or you could even do another check to be like, is it deactivated? You could have your test stop there and fail and like email you and be like, hey, this plugin isn't active. Or you could have it actually activate for you. So you could have this test running every hour that's just logging in and saying like, is this plugin active? And if it's not, activate it for me. So yeah, you can definitely do those types of almost like automated tasks with a Ghost Inspector test for sure. I think we'll probably wind it down on questions just so we don't go too long, but thanks everybody so much for the questions. Renato will probably mention this again, but we'll be kind of pulling the attendees and the questions and stuff and reach out to you with some sticker packs and fun stuff. So really appreciate your participation. Always really fun. Before I hand it back to Renato, I also just wanted to give a shout out again. This is our Customer Appreciation Month. We've got a blog post, like our customers are really awesome. We like try to, like give them shout outs and give them props and stay in touch and give them everything they need. So we appreciate y'all who like join the webinars and use our product. We're always open to feedback, apart from also like jumping in and troubleshooting your stuff. Love the feedback, feature requests. A lot of it leads to things that we've got, on a roadmap. A few cool things we've got coming, like screenshot comparison steps. So I talked a little bit about the screenshot comparison that gets done. We're working so that you can do those throughout your test at various points. We're working on a formal Jira integration for those of you who are like in the QA space and using Jira. So lots of useful stuff in the pipeline, and it's really like, coming from all of you, giving us the feedback. So we really appreciate it. Thanks for using Ghost Inspector.